In this video, we will be hearing from 4 grant professionals as they share expertise and insights into the common challenges and solutions of grant-funded projects.
What should we do when partners experience changes or challenges during the implementation phase of a grant?
I think the number one is to not create chaos or stress. There is no reason to get stressed out because a challenge arises or a change happens. An example for me was one of my major stakeholders. It was best for her to retire, and she retired in the middle of the grant. And that was a huge hit for the leadership piece at the state level from the university level. But we decided, okay, this is where we're at. We still have a management plan. We still have a timeline. We still have goals and we can still meet them. So it's confronting that reality that we are where we are, but we're okay. And as long as the leader keeps the stress and the chaos to a minimum by transparency, by open, honest communication, and then I still will always go back to your management plan. Be sure you're always adjusting and making notes on your management plan. And then that final piece is always keeping your program officer apprised of what the changes and challenges are. I had a standing with my program officer at the federal level once a month, and it, over a 6-year period, I got to where, if I had an issue, I would text him and say, hey, can I talk to you, 15 minutes of your time just to give you an update if there was a challenge or something that I really needed his input and approval to move forward. So don't be afraid of the reality, be flexible and be positive. Stay positive, and positive things will happen for your grant.
What is the best way to lead the grant development process with a group of COE and LEA parties to ensure our roles are clear?
I think that leading those effective grant development meetings takes a lot of experience and practice. Some of my key recommendations include, I think, first and foremost, building that connection and relationship with each of your partners, whether it's a COE or LEA, in advance of your first meeting so that they understand what role they're going to be playing and how they're going to be contributing with the partnership. Another thing that I recommend is to have a kickoff meeting with all of your external partners. So when you're prepping for that kickoff meeting, it's really helpful to develop an agenda. And on that agenda, you want to include things like an overview of what those partners are and what their contributions are going to be in a written form. I would also recommend to then collaboratively in that meeting come together and have that meeting be one where you're going to be defining those expectations around collaboration. This is how we want to collaborate. This is how I communicate best. This is the best way to reach me. Those types of definitions are really helpful as well. It's also helpful to come together and clarify what are the roles for the grant development process. So when you're thinking about that, you can develop some type of table or plan where you're delineating what are the roles, what are the assignments, and what are those deadlines associated with that grant development project. It's also helpful then to think about what are the strengths of the group that we have right here. So when you're handing out those assignments, you can think, who's really great at doing this? Who are our content experts here? How can they support? Who's going to be helping with evaluation? Who has expertise with budget and budget development? And then handing out and parsing out those assignments based off of that. I think it's also helpful at that very first meeting to identify how frequently do we need to meet. So thinking about what's the amount of time too that each partner is going to need to be able to accomplish their tasks, and then helping them to build out and identify this is the these are the amount of meetings that we need, and this is the type of frequency we need them with. This is the amount of time those meetings should span. And then lastly, I would say it's important to be able to think through all of this when you're trying to accommodate that time commitment, so that this really helps you lead to a better understanding with all of your group COE and LEA partners and make sure that those roles are clear.
Grant reports are sometimes thought about as checking off the box. What are some tips I can share with my colleagues about approaching this differently?
So when we receive a grant, most of us aren't really excited when we see a long list of reporting requirements. Like we may think to ourselves, this is going to take so long to complete. How am I ever going to fit this into my schedule? Or you might say, I'd much rather be doing the work than sitting in my office and writing reports. And then also I might be thinking, will the funder even read all these reports that I'm sending? But grant reports are very beneficial to those who are leading the project as well as to the funder. So they can help grant managers as we continue to implement a grant award and work towards securing funding to sustain the project. So some of the benefits include communicating to the funder the amazing work that has been done. You'll be communicating the activities, performance, as well as accomplishments with the funder, partners, and internal leadership. It's a way to celebrate and share your successes. Reporting also allows you to track the progress of your report. It gives you time to step back and reflect on what you have done and what still needs to be done. This helps with determining next steps and with decision making. Reports also assist with continuous improvement. You can think about what's working, what are my current challenges, and then again, look at next steps. When completing your report, you also want to be thinking about how you can leverage the information shared to support future funding. It is best practice to place the reporting dates on your calendar and then create a backwards map of specific tasks to be completed 90 days, 40 days, 45 days, and 15 days before the report is due. That way, you aren't scrambling at the last minute to get all the information you need and have time to reflect on the project as you are creating the report.
What do you recommend when there are new COE staff or have staff turnover, internally or with partners?
Having new staff can be an exciting time for any team, but it can also be stressful because of the onboarding process. Now, we can't always control turnover, but we can control the systems that we develop to ensure a smooth transition. One tool that I rely on quite a bit is an operations manual. Now, it takes a little bit of time to develop an operations manual for a particular project or an entire team or department. But once you have the format and overall framework, it's a living document that is updated regularly. Operation manuals for a particular grant are an essential tool. They can house artifacts, data, required reports that have been submitted, the grant application that was submitted originally, anything you can think of that would help someone understand and quickly be oriented towards that particular project. Now, if it's a County Office of Ed member joining your team and they're in charge of supervising a particular grant funded project, I would recommend that they reach out to the funding agency to introduce themselves to the grant analyst assigned to that particular grant. Relationships are extremely important in all aspects, but especially with grants. And so if there's been a transition and there's new staff members joining the COE team, it's important they reach out and make that connection with that funding agency. Now, if you have internal and external partners that are a part of your grant and they're also joining for the first time, part of the onboarding tools that you can consider are there any professional learning videos that are linked or connected to the grant project that you are implementing? So think, for example, if you have any slideshows or video presentations that have been made to a board or to staff or to the community, are those videos that can be shared with these new staff members so that they can quickly understand, oh, this is what the grant looks like in practice. It's nice to have a visual that goes along with all of the narrative that might have been written into an application. Along those lines, I'd also recommend, are there professional learning conferences or webinars that new team members can participate in? So for example, if your grant is focused on implementing multi-tiered systems of support for a school district, What are the conferences and webinars that are linked to that particular content area that would be helpful for the new staff member to support their ongoing learning? I would also recommend having staff meet with more seasoned staff. So if it's a new team member, whether they're at a school district or internally in your county office, I'd recommend connecting them with other staff who have been touching the project during this time. It's important to have that face time. So I recommend, if at all possible, if they could meet in person and have some regular check-ins scheduled. The first 3 months is important for somebody's onboarding period. They might have wonderings, curiosities. They're still getting to know the lay of the land. And so having someone that can meet with them regularly to assist in that transition is extremely helpful. I would also suggest just regular check-ins and ongoing coaching to ensure that they understand the tasks at hand. How is it going with this particular grant-funded project? Where are areas where you still have some concerns, where you're still wondering about how things are done? And then where are areas where you're really excelling and winning? So it's important to have some formal check-ins with new staff members as well.
An LEA that was written into a consortium application is now expressing concerns about being able to implement the project's objectives.
First off, I would say to schedule some standing meetings with the ELA to really listen. Have to be a good listener, take great notes, listen and create the trends of the issues that they're having so that you can organize it in a manner where you can address their concerns and build off of what's working. So building off of their strengths. So you're basically going to turn into being a coach and becoming very flexible with what the LEA needs are, because it may not necessarily be, you may not necessarily have the down and dirty of what they're actually dealing with. So you're going to want to look at their management plan and come up with a timeline, making sure that we're hitting the goals and objectives in a timely manner while acknowledging their concerns and coming up with solutions to fix those concerns. But I really want to stress that listening, having talk straight type of conversations, respecting their voices and making sure all voices are heard, while collaboratively coming up with solutions to meet the needs of the goals of the grant.
Being a grants professional at the COE level is complex and consists of several intricacies. What is the best way for the organization to understand what we do?
It will differ from one COE to another. However, what I'd like to do is just share a little bit about what I've done at my own COE over the last almost 7 years that I've been here. So I think the very first thing that I did when I started was work on garnering that support from key individuals in the organization. So thinking about that and then thinking about what and helping them develop out what that understanding is for our role. And so some of the key recommendations that I have, I would say first and foremost is making sure that you enlist the support and the recognition from your executive cabinet. So making sure you're getting that FaceTime in, you're scheduling those meetings, you're getting to know people, they're able to understand and know who you are, so you can enlist them as supporters of the work that you do. Another strategy that's worked really well for us is also getting it in writing. So you have something in writing where you delineate and people can easily reference and access this so that they can remember, because you might have a meeting and they might not recall that. So one of the things that we've done is we've developed what we call a purpose statement. So this is purpose statement for the work that we do, and it demonstrates this is what I'm doing and this is how it aligns with the goals of my agency or my strategic plan and my organization. And then we've taken this and we add it to our webpage. We use it at our kickoff meetings for our internal teams. We add it to all of our trainings. So everything that we do, it's really clear. This is what we do and how we do it for our organization. One of the other things too is to create some type of visual document that demonstrates all of the services for easy reference. So I think that's also something that's really helpful. Another strategy that I think is really helpful too is thinking about what are our current existing internal communication tools or channels, and how can I use those tools or channels to highlight my successes or to highlight my team's successes. And so maybe you have an internal newsletter that goes out and you're able to share these or the grants that were awarded or secured, or you have some other type of system out there to just champion your work and be your own champion in that process. Something else that's been really helpful as a strategy is really to help increase the understanding and visibility within the organization is by providing trainings. So there's lots of different trainings that my department and I provide, but one of them is on, these are our internal processes. We have another one which just delineates, these are the services that we provide. Those types of things are really helpful to be able to help increase that visibility as well as understanding of what we do for the organization. Something else that I think has been really helpful finally is getting other colleagues and coworkers to serve as a spokesperson on your behalf. So sometimes it's helpful if someone else is out there sharing those benefits of those grants or sharing that impact or testimonials of the work that you've been doing. And that could be either through a formal or informal process, but really it's getting the word out there for your services and the caliber of your work. And eventually what's going to happen is all of these things are going to lead to this recognition for your organization, understanding what you do and how you do it and how you support them.
What are some steps to take when a funder asks for matching funds that needs to be included in the budget?
So it's really important that there is clarity between the program team and the internal business services team around the source of the match. If the match is in cash, then it's necessary that the source is clearly identified and internal processes around cost centers are followed. If the cost is in kind, then there needs to be agreement on the source and tracking methods. Matching funds must be tracked and submitted to the funder. So it's important that processes are put in place to ensure this information is collected on a regular basis so that the team has the information when reports are due.
A common challenge for grants includes a delayed start date. What is the best course of action?
This is actually a very common scenario. So if you are a grant professional at a county office or at a school district and you find yourself in this situation, I want to say the first step is you take a deep breath. Know that this is actually almost to be expected in a lot of grants. Although the start date might be typically July 1, your project may not hear from the funding agency for several months. So unfortunately, there's a lot of delays that are going to come in that year one. The first recommendation I have is that you reach out to the funding agency, have a meeting with them and understand how much wiggle room do we have with our timeline? Can we go ahead and modify to adjust for the maybe 3 or 4 months where there was a delay in starting the project? If there's been a delay with staff, for example, that happens very regularly in that first year is you get board approval and then you move forward with posting a position and recruiting and hiring. So several months can pass by. Well, there's also several months of salary and benefits that were written into a budget that now need to perhaps be repurposed. So another question for the funding agency would be, can we carry over funding? Can we modify our budget to reflect that we have the savings in a position that didn't start until 6 months after we originally anticipated? And then for that carryover, it's important, more of a fiscal related question, but if we are allowed to carry over, do we have to track the funds separately if it's a multi-year grant? That's an important question to ask. The other things I would recommend is to get back on track. Sometimes people feel a sense of pressure and urgency. And I agree, there is a sense of urgency to ensure that timelines and objectives are going to be met. So the best recommendation I have for that is bring everyone together that is involved with the grant. This is not a conversation that is had via email. It's important to come together, have some FaceTime, and let folks know, here's where we are and here's where we need to be. So now that we are adjusting our timelines, how can we make it doable for everybody to understand we're still going to have objectives and data requirements and evaluation requirements, but how do we ensure that everything has been modified to meet this new timeline that's been established?
What are tips to support a grants budget that is not being managed well?
Because oftentimes program managers get really excited about the project and want to begin implementation right away without really thinking about the budget. So before you start any program implementation, you need to meet with your accountant to ensure that you really understand your budget. For example, you'll be asking yourselves, what are allowable expenses? What are the timelines? What are the reporting requirements? What are the processes for budget modifications, etc.? It's important to create a process to continuously monitor your budget. Some ideas include, on a large scale, work with your COE to create a system of support for grant managers that includes your budget office. Individually, you can meet monthly with your accountant and go over expected versus actuals, as well as income versus expenses. Be looking at the amount of money you have spent each month. Be asking yourself these questions. Am I on track to spend all of my funds by the end of the funding period? Am I spending too quickly? Am I not spending quickly enough? So when I managed my first grant, I spent a lot of the grant. Actually, I didn't spend a lot of the grant money, and I was really, really proud of myself. I thought I was being so fiscally responsible and just thought that I was like the best thing ever. But I later learned that that was not a great strategy. You want to make sure you're spending all of your money by the end of the grant period. That is so important. Secondly, individually, you can be transparent with your advisory group on the budget. You want to get input from them with any questions, change in the directions you have, etc. Also, be thinking about the best way to use your funds to meet objectives. Think about both internal and external partnerships. This will affect your budget.
What are some recommendations to follow when a grant project is not on track to meet outcomes?
Like with all projects, grants at times need assistance to get back on track. Having an ongoing check-in with all team members is extremely important to ensure that this doesn't happen. But if you find yourself in that situation, there's a couple recommendations I have. One is if you're working with school districts as partners or community-based organizations or an external evaluator, and they need to be at the table to determine what the next steps need to be, it's important that you speak to the folks who are the decision maker at those organizations. It could be at times that the school district or the community-based partner isn't aware of all of the requirements that came with this grant. So if you have a memorandum of understanding that includes a scope of work, details that are part of that agreement, and perhaps even showing them the grant that is actually funding specific activities, it's important to use those as documents to anchor the conversation. Here's what we said we were going to do. Here's the scope of work, and then here's where we are today. It's not about placing blame for who did what or who didn't do a certain item. It's important to focus on, one, saving the relationship with the school district and your community-based organizations and getting back on track to meet the objectives. It is possible to have a crucial conversation that has a beautiful result at the end of it that helps everybody feel good and open about what the next steps will be. So with that said, is once you have that conversation, everyone's understanding what needs to happen, that you develop a plan. And a plan needs to have deadlines for when things are going to be submitted or actually fully executed. So for example, if a grant called for providing professional development and the release of teachers to attend, what is the date for that professional development workshop? What is the commitment on the district end to provide staff release time? Who are the staff members attending? So think about those logistical pieces that you can begin to use to ensure that those timelines and objectives will be met moving forward. I would also recommend that you reach out to the funding agency to determine, will there be any ramifications? could there be an impact to our funding if we do not meet the objectives that we said we were going to meet in year one? Some grants, you get your grant funding for multiple years. Federal grants can be the same, but it is contingent upon a successful implementation of the prior year. So it's extremely important that all of our partners, internally and externally, understand, although we are being awarded a multi-year grant, if we are not doing what we need to be doing in year one, we may not see a year two. That can sound dramatic, but it can absolutely happen. And the impact of that, bottom line is, students won't be served, staff won't be served, communities won't be served. That's why it's important in that early conversation to have that dialogue and focus on, it's about making sure that students and staff and families get the services that we said we were going to deliver. That's really the number one focus. We are smart human beings. We put a man on the moon. We can figure out ways around the hiccups and barriers that we've encountered. And oftentimes I have found that it starts with an in-person conversation. Again, avoid having this in emails back and forth that can be misinterpreted, but understand the severity of what could happen if we don't get the project back on track. That ramification can result in even a finding for the County Office of Education, which not just harms the project, but can harm the organization overall. So, my last tip would be, again, focus on the relationships that are involved in making sure that items are submitted in a timely, effective manner, and that there's deadlines set so that everyone understands what are we doing and by when and who's responsible.
We hope the scenarios and solutions shared have been helpful to you. Thank you to all of our on-screen contributors. This video was made possible by the San Diego County Office of Education. A special thank you to the California County Superintendents, Fresno County Superintendent of Schools, and the Santa Clara County Office of Education. For more information about the COE Grant Professionals Network, please email grants@sdcoe.net.